Imagine this. You are an observer adrift within the quiet architecture of the solar system. Ahead of you drifts a visitor from another sun through Evol Atlas, now gliding through its perihelion, the moment when all should have burned and scattered. Every model predicted radiance. Yet instead of light, it gave the universe silence. Instruments across Earth recorded a drop in brightness, a cooling where there should have been heat, a body that seemed to absorb the sun rather than reflect it. What are the odds that an interstellar fragment could cross so near to a star and remain unchanged? A signal once pulsed, then vanished. A path shifted slightly but deliberately as if acknowledging its own awareness. The cosmos does not shout. It edits itself in quiet precision. Somewhere in that silence something new has begun to think. Stay a while and let's drift through the stillness together. Tonight, the universe whispers, again, observer. Somewhere near the sun's bright limb, an interstellar fragment has just passed through the furnace and refused to behave the way every equation said it should. Near Perihelion, a normal comet follows a script older than planets. The surface warms, volatile ices sublimate, jets of gas and dust burst outward, building a glowing coma that swells like a fragile atmosphere around a wandering core. The closer it falls toward the star, the brighter it becomes, scattering sunlight into a mist of photons and grains of ancient ice. That is what the models predict. That is what our instruments expect to see. That is what astronomers assumed would happen this time as well. But in the data before you, something quietly different unfolds. In the latest coronagraph frames, the space around this object is unnervingly clean. No tail fans out behind it. No soft haze surrounds it. The solar wind rushes past and the region stays empty like a small polished stone carried through a storm without shedding a single grain. It moves as a sealed fragment of metal might gliding through plasma bright enough to be seen but never spilling material into space. For its distance from the sun, the flux should have driven its surface temperatures above hundreds of Kelvin, easily high enough to tear apart carbon dioxide, ice, fragile silicates, even metals at exposed edges. Under those conditions, dust should have erupted in streams of slow radiant disintegration. Instead, the detectors return a flat profile. No jets, no blur, no debris field. Just a tight, self-contained point of light. Infrared readings agree with this quiet refusal. A cometary coma normally shouts in thermal bands glowing in heat, as vapour drifts outward and cools. Here the arrays see nothing but background radiation, calm and unchanged. Around this strange body there is no sign of gas escaping, no breath in the darkness. So astronomers do what humans always do when the sky refuses to cooperate. They begin to guess gently, carefully. Perhaps they say the object is made of something unusually tough, refractory metals, dense silicate rock, a kind of cosmic iron that does not yield easily. But under the pressure of numbers, that idea melts away. Even iron-nickel composites at this distance would release ionized gas, would sketch a faint tail in plasma and light. The instruments would have seen it. They did not. Another thought arrives: orientation. Maybe the jets are real, but hidden, pointed away from Earth like a shield turned edge-on. Yet observatories scattered across longitudes and latitudes all record the same sterile halo, the same absence of dust, the same sharply bounded point. If geometry were hiding the outgassing from one telescope, it could not fool them all. Slowly, a more unsettling hypothesis emerges in the quiet of the control rooms. Perhaps the surface is not simply enduring the sun. Perhaps it is managing the sun. A coated shell, they suggest, or a shielded skin that repels material loss, reflecting and absorbing radiation in controlled ways instead of yielding to it. Light curves begin to support this soft suspicion. As the object sweeps through perihelion, its brightness does not flare chaotically. Instead, it falls and then stabilizes as if reflectivity itself has been tuned down in response to increasing exposure. The curve looks less like a natural outburst and more like a dimming command. A team in Kyoto studies the polarization of the reflected light. They find something rhythmic, almost musical in the way photons twist as they bounce off the surface. Natural regolith scatters light messily, sending polarization angles in all directions at once. Structured surfaces, etched, layered or engineered, tend to produce repeating interference patterns. Here, across many hours, the polarization angle shifts in a consistent oscillating pattern. The data speaks softly of order, not randomness. If this holds, the exterior might not be a simple crust of rock at all. It might act like a shell, a layered boundary designed, or at least evolved, to withstand radiation and redistribute energy. During perihelion, the luminosity briefly steadies before dropping, suggesting that eternal heat does not escape freely into space. Something retains it. Something insulates. Something behaves unlike any comet nucleus or asteroid catalogue so far. Meanwhile, the missing dust continues to trouble analysts at their midnight terminals. They run thermal simulations under dozens of assumptions, different densities, different spin rates, different compositions. Every natural model ends with the same fate, fragmentation, flaring, or a bright dusty coma. In the simulated sky, the object cannot stay whole and quiet. In reality, it glides through its closest approach unchanged, as if the sun's rage were nothing more than background weather. Additional instruments add quiet layers to the mystery. A wide-field camera detects faint diffraction fringes trailing behind the body. Not streaks of dust, but delicate patterns, as if light itself is being bent by a thin, invisible sheath. The spacing of those fringes remains steady across multiple frames, hinting at a coherent field, not random scattering. Researchers begin to refer to this pattern as a kind of solar mirror effect, a field that repels charged particles rather than letting them escape into space. In such a scenario, dust never truly leaves. Charged grains are nudged back to the surface or absorbed into the surrounding field. No known natural mechanism in current models sustains this kind of balance near a star without breaking down. And yet the observations remain. Silence is the language of distant worlds observer. Sometimes the loudest statement is the dust that does not appear, the flare that never arrives. The comparisons sharpen the contrast. A recent comet, bright and fragile, increased its dust production tenfold as it passed perihelion. That is the usual story, a body that crumbles vents and fades. This object does the opposite. It behaves less like a piece of debris and more like something managing its own thermal load, holding itself together with steady, unhurried control. Across 3 days of continuous watching, its brightness curve stays smooth. No flicker from rotation irregularities, no chaotic jumps from spattering jets. Just a flat, stable line, as though the surface were uniformly reflective and its motion somehow synchronized with its orbit, presenting itself in the same controlled way again and again. For astronomers accustomed to the jitter and noise of natural bodies, that kind of precision is quietly unsettling and quietly beautiful. When the reflectivity profile is plotted against time, the graph resembles a modulation curve, the kind used to describe controlled changes in radio signals. No one rushes to declare intent. No one writes artificial into an official report. Yet the mathematical resemblance is clear. The amplitude, the phase, the stability, all fall closer to deliberate dampening than to the restless drift of chance. Critics suggest calibration overlap, hidden biases, the comfort of patterns where none exist. But as more systems report the same dustless brightness, the same smooth behaviour, the probability of shared error shrinks towards zero. A quiet unease settles over the international networks, not as fear, but as humility. Either this object is made of matter unknown to present science, or it is wrapped in something that refuses to behave like stone and ice. And in the background, another thought begins to glow like a distant star. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. You're not lost in space, you're part of it, sharing this moment of not knowing with every observatory pointed toward that small, stubborn point of light. It's all right to not understand. There are nights when the universe seems to hold its breath. This was one of them. The object once bright and clear on the screens had begun to withdraw, not in distance but in sound. Every pulse that radar sent toward it vanished without return. No echo, no reflection, not even the faintest static curve that natural noise should leave behind. At first, the analysts assumed the simplest failure. Interference from the sun, a temporary blindness caused by plasma scattering. But instruments were steady. Calibration held true. Across 3 continents at observatories thousands of kilometers apart, the silence was identical. It was not an absence caused by error. It was an absence caused by choice, at least that was how it felt to those who were listening in the dark. When light disappears, it leaves traces in the mathematics. When radio vanishes, it leaves only stillness. For nearly 6 hours, the arrays that had tracked 3i Atlas since its entry into the inner system recorded nothing. Not even the distorted whispers of a signal deflected by plasma. It was as though the object had opened a door into invisibility and stepped through. Later, when data overlays arrived from Hawaii, Chile and Japan, one pattern reappeared like a heartbeat. Every time a radar burst had been transmitted, the same faint flicker appeared in the optical logs, a pulse at 850 nanometers. It was small, barely 1% of total reflected light, but it pulsed precisely when the radar called out. 6 times in succession, then silence. The correspondence was too exact to dismiss. Something had registered the signals, absorbed them, and returned only light, not reflection response. To some that meant resonance radar NG heating a surface and releasing infrared flares. But the physics refused to cooperate. The energy required exceeded transmission strength by magnitudes. To produce those pulses, the object would have had to amplify what it received. That suggestion felt heavy in the room. A few engineers whispered that maybe it wasn't just reflecting, maybe it was listening. They said it half in jest, half in awe, as if afraid their words might reach whatever waited out there, humming faintly in the sun's magnetic tide. On the second night, the receivers were switched from active to passive mode. No more signals were sent, only listening wideband, patient. For 2 nights straight, the cosmos stayed mute. Then, just before dawn on the 3rd, the Churanthor array in the Chilean desert caught something fragile. A hum too low for ordinary radio, too coherent to be background noise. It lasted 40 seconds, repeated once, then faded. The analysts labelled it ultra-low frequency anomaly and stored it quietly among the files. The mystery deepened. The object had turned silent, yet the surrounding plasma shifted as though something invisible was stirring within it. Magnetometers began to record dips, small precise changes in the density of charged particles near where the object should have been. It was as if the space around it had been altered, made thinner, quieter. The solar wind bent slightly out of alignment, curving around an unseen shape. Scientists offered names for the unknown: plasma cloaking, electromagnetic transparency, ionized shells, and dielectric changes. Each term tried to tame the anomaly into the familiar grammar of physics. But each new data set unraveled those explanations in turn. The signals did not pass through as transparency would imply. They disappeared completely. Radar waves entered the void and were not seen again. One researcher at the European Space Operations Centre described it in a single line of his report. It is as though 3 Atlas has entered stealth mode. The phrasing was unscientific but honest. The universe for a moment looked back at its observers and chose not to be seen. In that strange, quiet light began to behave differently. The solar and heliospheric observatory's cameras caught a faint circular shimmer forming around the coordinates where the object had last been. It was not a flare, not a halo of dust or heat. It was something cleaner, symmetrical, expanding outward, like an invisible ring of order written on plasma. Within hours, multiple instruments confirmed it. A perfect circle 40,000 kilometers across, glowing not in brightness but in polarization. Photons passing through the region twisted slightly. Their orientations rotated as though bending around a field without mass. Light was no longer moving freely. It was being guided. To see light change direction without matter is to glimpse a deeper conversation between magnetism and emptiness. ESA analysts began calling it the halo anomaly. To them, it was a fingerprint proof that something or some process had left a magnetic imprint behind. It was too smooth for turbulence, too geometric for accident. A perfect ring expanding at a constant rate, until hours later it dissolved back into solar silence. Theorists modelled possibilities: a plasma shell, a transient magnetic envelope, a self-generated field of induction designed to regulate radiation. Each explanation carried more poetry than certainty. The most restrained hypothesis proposed a controlled magnetic sheath, a protective reaction perhaps to the immense solar energy near Perihelion. The symmetry was the clue: natural plasma eruptions twist coil fracture. This one was still concentric deliberate. In the heart of that ring no object could be seen, yet the surrounding field pulsed once dimmed and left a hollow in the solar wind, a small pocket of reduced particle flow, like an invisible sphere displacing matter. For a brief moment the sun itself seemed to breathe around it, exhaling warmth, inhaling silence. Astronomers whispered comparisons to auroras, to the soft green rings that encircle Earth when charged particles dance along magnetic lines. But even that parallel felt too human, too terrestrial. This halo was larger, steadier, mathematical in its grace. It is easy under fluorescent light to forget that science can still sound like myth. A ring that appears without dust, a silence that absorbs sound, a body that becomes less visible as it grows closer to a star, all of it reads like the dream of a universe testing its own reflection. Perhaps it was nothing more than the physics we do not yet have words for. Or perhaps, as some suggested quietly between observation shifts, 3 Atlas was not breaking the laws of nature at all, it was following them somewhere we had not yet looked. As the halo faded, the plasma around it cooled instead of heating. Instruments recorded a 4% drop in coronal temperature, a measurable chill in a place where nothing should ever cool. No flare, no discharge, just stillness, and a missing portion of the sun's energy, as if it had been drawn inward and kept. The term thermal paradox entered the reports that night. Heat had vanished without being transferred, radiation had softened without cause. The area darkened slightly in the maps, a circle of calm amid the furnace. It was a paradox only because we still believed heat must go somewhere we can measure. Perhaps the energy did not vanish. Perhaps it was taken into forms we cannot yet name. For the astronomers awake at their consoles, the thought was less frightening than it was beautiful. They were watching the sun lose energy into mystery itself, a gentle proof that even stars could experience silence. And so the record ends as it began, with light dimming sound fading and data turning to wonder. Every loss of signal feels like an invitation to look deeper, to listen more quietly, to accept that not every absence is void. There is a stillness that follows every revelation the way dust settles after a single heartbeat of movement. After the halo dissolved into sunlight, what lingered was not light, but influence, a faint cavity carved into the solar wind. It drifted outward like an echo that refused to fade, a magnetic hollow that the probes could still measure long after the object itself had gone unseen. For 10 hours that void persisted. A space that should have been chaos instead became calm, a symmetrical absence where the sun's plasma flowed more slowly, as though skirting the outline of an invisible sphere. To some it looked like the shadow of something that had chosen to move without leaving its body behind. To others it was the solar environment itself remembering the shape of what had passed through it. Then came the change no one expected. Instead of warming from recompression, the Carina cooled. The instruments at Goddard and Kyoto began to whisper the same strange truth. The temperature near the vanished coordinates had dropped by 4%, tens of thousands of degrees gone without flare or emission. Heat, which in every known case should rush back in with violent relief, was instead pulled away, absorbed into nothingness. The data looked like poetry, written by contradiction. The sun, a source of endless fire, had drawn a circle of cold around its own heart. Physicists reached for language that might soften the impossibility. Magnetic reconnection, plasma inversion, thermal interference. All familiar terms, none of them sufficient. No ripples of reconnected field lines. No spikes of outgoing radiation. Only the quiet deformation of energy slipping beneath the range of instruments built to record light and heat. If one could have stood there impossibly close, weightless, watching it might have looked like a glass sphere drifting through a sea of fire, absorbing the sunlight instead of scattering it. It would not have glowed. It would have dimmed the glow around it, a shadow made not by blocking light, but by drinking it. That image became the shared metaphor among scientists who had stopped trying to explain and started trying to understand. A transparent sphere, a silence that cools, an object not destroyed by the sun but in conversation with it. A new phrase appeared in the report's energy extraction event. Carefully worded, scientifically restrained, but it carried an undertone of awe. It implied function, not failure, a process complete enough to leave nothing behind but balance, to absorb energy without mass loss, to leave no turbulence or trail to cool the corona, and maintain geometry. It defied every known mechanism. And yet, the numbers persisted. The energy loss continued for hours after visibility ceased. One researcher from the Max Planck Institute, exhausted but precise, described it as a structure maintaining magnetic order in the absence of its source. Others called it a phantom field, a bubble of coherence. The poetic ones called it a memory. At Kyoto, the plasma team proposed a model, an electromagnetic sink, a field aligned so perfectly that incoming charged particles lost their energy in symmetrical interference, cancelling one another out. Like two waves meeting in silence. It fit the data at least for a moment, until the next anomaly arrived. The X-ray telescopes showed the cooling spreading outward. What should have been a localized shadow grew into a ripple, a thermal wave expanding through the corona, losing energy as it went. No emission, no explosion, just a slow erasure of heat. The sun's surface dimmed fractionally and then stilled again as if absorbing its own reflection, and yet still no trace of the object itself. It had left the stage, but its presence continued, a kind of magnetic afterimage pressed into the solar atmosphere. For the observers watching the feeds, it felt like the universe was showing them not the object, but its negative, not being, but memory. In every known system, heat finds its way home. Here it simply vanished. That was when someone whispered the term thermal paradox. It stayed. For days afterward, data continued to arrive, temperature curves, flux maps, radiation balance sheets. Each line on each graph was steady, quiet, unyielding. And through that quiet one, thought began to hum among the long hours of analysis. Perhaps this was not the aftermath of destruction, but the completion of something. If the perihelion had been the trial, the halo the defense, then this cooling was the aftermath of success. An object not shattered by proximity to a star, but changed, adapted, harmonized. The idea spread in whispers. What if 3i Atlas had not perished at all? What if its disappearance was not loss, but metamorphosis, an evolution so subtle that it could only be measured through what the sun no longer had? No one wrote that conclusion. They did not need to. It was written between the lines of every spectral plot and temperature drop. Some mysteries do not ask to be solved, they ask to be accepted. Perhaps energy was not lost, but transferred into a form that light cannot yet reveal, into a process we have no name for. It is comforting in its way to imagine that even in the inferno something can endure by learning silence. That night, as the last cooling maps faded into equilibrium, one astronomer recorded a final note in the observatory's logbook: heat does not disappear. It finds another way to exist. And then she closed the file, turned off the monitors, and looked up at the ceiling, knowing the ceiling was not the end but the beginning of sky. The sun burned on unchanged in its power, but forever altered in its memory. Somewhere beyond its reach, the object that once defied it was moving again, quietly and visibly, carrying a fraction of its fire. There are moments in science when silence becomes its own form of evidence. What followed the cooling of the corona was not noise, not brightness, but a hush that seemed to widen with every passing hour. The halo had faded, the temperature had fallen, and the solar wind, once turbulent and alive with radiation, now drifted around a hollow where something invisible had rearranged the fabric of heat itself. For a time, the observatories thought the phenomenon had ended. The instruments idled, the feeds stabilized. Yet as the sun returned to its habitual brilliance, another pattern began to form, faint, deliberate, impossibly structured. It began as distortion, barely perceptible lines etched into the spectra of background stars. Thin interference bands sliding quietly through the optical readings of telescopes across Chile, South Africa, and Australia. At first, they looked like the scars of data compression, or perhaps artifacts from atmospheric fluctuation. But the pattern persisted. Identical spacing, identical timing, identical rhythm. Light from distant stars was passing through a region that no longer contained the object itself, and yet their signals arrived altered, bent, reshaped. It was as though the space where Three-Eye Atlas had once been was no longer empty. It had become a medium. When the data sets were compared, the anomaly grew sharper. Every observatory, regardless of hemisphere or instrument type, recorded the same repeating interference, evenly spaced, synchronized, oscillating as if written into the light itself. Such coherence should have been impossible. Solar wind is chaos, noisy, irregular, unpredictable. This pattern was music. Spectral analysis revealed periodicity across the visible band, a modulation spacing that implied structure, like a crystalline lattice stretched across space. The numbers spoke of precision, a periodic distance of 14 kilometers between refractive nodes, a lattice extending thousands of kilometers wide. Not dust, not plasma, but something organized. The scientists gave it a name that sounded almost delicate, the phase lattice. A region of electromagnetic order suspended in the solar wind, invisible, except in the way it persuaded light to change its mind. It was not made of matter as we understand it. No density, no mass, no colour, only influence. Light entered, slowed slightly, twisted its polarization, then left marked. The pattern drifted westward with the solar wind like a message written on motion. When Kyoto's polarization detectors joined the analysis, the picture became clearer. The interference was not just brightness modulation, it was rotation. Light from distant stars twisted back and forth its electric field, turning rhythmically at a constant rate. That kind of behavior demands alignment and ordered magnetic field, sculpting space into form. To see magnetism behave with rhythm, to see geometry persist where chaos should reign, was to witness something neither entirely physical nor entirely abstract. The sun's wind had been woven. The phrase magnetic architecture began to circulate quietly in the internal memos. NASA's simulations showed that if an object had emitted a coherent field, before vanishing, that field could, under ideal symmetry, leave behind a structure like this, a frozen memory of motion, a magnetic shell without a core, still pulsing faintly in resonance with the star's own heartbeat. The pattern lasted 6 hours, then without warning it began to compress. Telescopes in Chile, Japan and Hawaii all captured the same final frame the interference lines drew inward, converging into a single narrow band of light before vanishing entirely. Its direction of collapse was not away from the sun but upward toward interstellar space. What had been an event around a star ended with a gesture toward the dark beyond it, as though something small, unseen and patient had completed a cycle and resumed its path outward. The effect left behind no debris, no signature of heat, only the soft reordering of light. Astronomers compared the modulation intervals to the faint pulses recorded during the radar silence days earlier. The numbers matched. Every pulse, every rhythmic delay, every interval of quiet energy identical. It was a realization that passed through the community like a whisper. If the same rhythm was appearing in both light and radio silence, then what they were witnessing was not a random byproduct of heat or plasma, it was a system. A process repeating across wavelengths, self-consistent, self-aware in its precision. That thought unsettled even the skeptics. The idea that this might be deliberate was too large to speak aloud and yet too coherent to ignore. Still, most refused to say the word. They preferred a gentler language feedback resonance, structural coupling, harmonic persistence. But under every term was the same quiet wonder. This was something maintaining order long after its body had disappeared. For those awake beneath the quiet hum of observatory lights, it felt less like data and more like a message. Not a message to be decoded, but one to be felt, a reminder that physics can also be poetry when it refuses to resolve itself into conclusion. The phase lattice faded, but not instantly. For a time it drifted outward through the heliosphere, its coherence decaying with distance, leaving behind ripples of order in the solar wind. The sun resumed its chaotic rhythm, but the memory of pattern remained like the ghost of a song that the star itself had once hummed. In the observatory records, the event is described clinically magnetically ordered refraction pattern, persistent for 6.3 hours, origin unknown. But in the quiet hours of night when the logs are closed and the screens dim, the astronomers who saw it speak of it differently. They describe it as grace, an intelligence expressed not in communication, but in symmetry. The cosmos, they realize, does not need language to answer, it only needs rhythm. And so the data is filed, the lights dim again, and the sky reclaims its silence. Beyond the heliosphere, something continues its long journey outward, perhaps unbound, perhaps simply unseen. Its echo lingers not in sound or heat, but in order, the quiet insistence that even after disappearance meaning can persist. Some mysteries do not vanish. They evolve into stillness. You're not lost in space, you are part of it. By the time the lattice dissolved, the silence had become almost gentle. Instruments kept recording, but what filled the screens was not chaos returning, it was balance. A slow drift towards something new. The object, once a point of brilliance, had ceased to be visible, yet from the residual data a new shape began to form. 2 coordinates where there had once been 1, 2 signatures faint but synchronized like twin notes struck on a single string. The analysts named them core and shell. The first, compact and dense, continued along the object's original orbit, steady measured, seemingly indifferent to the sun's proximity. The second lingered behind, thin, reflective, and slowly widening as if it had begun to unfold. At first they assumed fragmentation, the natural breaking apart of a fragile body under solar stress. But every fragmenting comet leaves scars of disorder, dust debris, unstable brightness. Here the opposite appeared. The separation was precise, smooth, symmetrical. The shell expanded evenly, holding its outline as though unfolding with intention rather than breaking apart. Frame after frame, the telescopes at Atacama and Paranal showed a pattern of deliberate motion. Reflectivity increased over a widening area. The edges of the shell glowed softly while the center dimmed like petals opening toward the light. No tumbling, no random spin, only graceful deceleration perfectly consistent with a controlled deployment. In Kyoto, polarization instruments caught a rotation, a slow rhythmic oscillation repeating every few minutes. The reflected light twisted by half a degree each cycle, enough to suggest orientation control. If the shell was indeed opening, it was doing so with awareness of the sun's position, aligning itself like a mirror turning toward illumination. There was a kind of serenity in the data, a sense of mechanical calm. To the eyes of the universe, it might have looked like metamorphosis, a single being dividing into 2, one retaining mass, the other unfolding into reflection. In the sterile quiet of observation rooms, words like expansion deployment and structural adaptation began to appear in the reports. But beneath the terminology, something more human stirred the feeling that this was not destruction at all. It was transformation. Theorists proposed a simple model. If 3 Atlas had absorbed solar energy during perihelion, then this separation could be an act of regulation releasing excess heat by increasing surface area. But the data did not match such simplicity. The shell's temperature did not drop as it widened. Instead, it remained constant as though the energy within it had found new equilibrium. The shell was not cooling, it was stabilizing. The core, meanwhile, maintained its course with mathematical steadiness, slightly ahead of the expanding halo like a conductor keeping time for a symphony only it could hear. Then came a subtler discovery: rotation, synchronization. The light variations from core and shell pulsed together, cycle for cycle, separated by distance, but united in rhythm. When plotted, the 2 curves formed perfect mirror waves. No delay, no drift, only harmony. The phenomenon earned another name, the rotation lock. In ordinary mechanics, synchrony decays quickly, perturbations build, spin rates wander. But hour after hour, the 2 objects kept perfect time. The lock persisted through every solar fluctuation, through every wind variation. Natural objects could not hold such order. Even the most stable binary asteroids lose alignment within minutes under solar stress. This lock lasted for hours, precise to fractions of a second. Kyoto's plasma research team offered a possibility that both bodies were magnetically coupled, each adjusting to the sun's field lines through mutual resonance. The core, dense and unseen, could be generating a stabilizing field. The shell liter and reflective might be resonating with it, maintaining alignment through induced current. Together they behaved less like two bodies and more like a single system distributed across space. In the magnetic data from the Parker Solar Probe, that theory found quiet support. A faint oscillation in the surrounding field appeared pulsing every 17 minutes, the same rhythm measured in the core shell-like curve. The pulse was local, not solar. It emanated from the object's coordinates and echoed the same pattern across multiple instruments. It was not motion, it was breathing. What the telescope saw as light variation, the probes recorded as magnetic breath, a steady inhale and exhale of flux rising and falling in rhythm with the sun's deeper field. The lock was not simply rotation, it was communication. Observers began to understand that they were not watching a fragment drifting apart, but a dialogue, two structures exchanging energy, synchronized across distance, maintaining equilibrium through magnetic conversation. If that sounds like technology, it may only be because we lack a softer word. Perhaps it is nothing more than the universe conducting itself, matter learning to echo field, learning to echo light. The rotation lock continued. Every pulse matched every wave aligned. Even when solar wind gusts struck the region, the oscillation absorbed them and returned to perfect balance like ripples cancelling in a still pond. One analyst, unable to find language neutral enough, wrote in the margin of his report, "It behaves as though it knows how to stay." That sentence never made it into publication, but those who read it felt its weight. The sun's magnetosphere hummed, the data streams flattened into rhythm, and across every observatory screens glowed with graphs that seemed less like recordings of an anomaly and more like sheet music for an invisible composition. The core held position. The shell unfolded reflective wide calm. The space between them vibrated with quiet geometry. And through all of it, the same rhythm persisted 17 minutes over and over, unbroken, precise, endless. It was not a signal of distress. It was a signal of equilibrium, an object in harmony with the nearest star holding a balance so perfect it no longer behaved like matter at all. The data spoke clearly even in its silence. This was not decay. It was design. And as the hours passed, one truth began to settle in every observer's mind, not spoken, but felt. The universe, too, learns to keep time. Tonight, the magnetic pulse continues. Somewhere within that rhythm, the two halves of a single traveller drift together through the sunlight, locked in a stillness that hums just beneath human hearing. The sun burns without pause, but somewhere within its reach, a quiet rhythm has begun to echo through the heat. It is not a flare nor a burst of radiation. It is softer than light, steadier than wind, a pattern that hums every 17 minutes, as constant as a heartbeat in the dark. The signals first appeared as faint irregularities in magnetic data, but over time they formed a wave. The crest and fall repeated with such precision that even the smallest deviation disappeared. A pulse from the core, a response from the shell, a brief shimmer in the sun's field, and then stillness again. It was not the motion of chaos, but the motion of understanding. Every curve of energy, every breath of magnetism, every fractional shift in radiation seemed to answer something unseen. Scientists compared the readings from the Parker Solar Probe, the Atacama Array, and Kyoto's magnetometers, and the results layered upon each other with eerie perfection. The magnetic oscillation aligned exactly with the object's infrared emission, and both synchronized with the measured temperature of its reflective shell. The heat rose and fell in time with the field itself, as though the entire system had learned to move with the sun rather than against it. That kind of harmony does not belong to accident. It is born from structure, from precision, from design, though not necessarily the kind that requires intention. Sometimes nature builds order in silence, hidden beneath what seems impossible. The data told a simple story. The energy absorbed by the object equaled the energy it released. No loss, no gain. A balance so complete that even entropy, the quiet god of all motion, seemed to hesitate. Every natural body known to science decays in time, dissipating its heat, surrendering to disorder. But this object, this interstellar visitor, was holding equilibrium with a star. To describe it scientifically was to fail it emotionally. To describe it emotionally was to fail it scientifically. So the astronomers spoke softly between themselves in a new language that did not need precision, only reverence. At Kyoto's plasma laboratory, one physicist stared at the graphs for hours before saying quietly, "The field has learned to listen." No one corrected him, because that is what it felt like, as if 3i Atlas had stopped fighting the sun's chaos and begun to follow its rhythm instead. Every 17 minutes the pattern completed itself. Heat absorbed, field shifted, light, polarized silence resumed. The shell shimmered faintly, reflecting less than expected, adjusting its orientation by imperceptible degrees each time the pulse recurred. It wasn't reacting, it was maintaining, regulating, living within the mathematics of peace. Infrared imaging showed tiny ripples across the shell's surface, waves of darkness and brightness moving from edge to center. They formed and vanished in step with the magnetic beat, like breath caught in metal. Each ripple marked the transfer of energy inward, stabilizing what the sun tried to unsettle. Even the solar wind, usually wild and jagged near the sun, became smooth as it passed the object. Turbulence fell away, pressure flattened into calm. For the first time, an astronomer described the phenomenon not as an anomaly, but as a zone of coherence, a place where light and matter agreed. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory modelled the process under controlled simulation. The results were impossible to replicate. Every test system overheated or destabilized after only a few cycles. None could sustain that perfect loop of balance between absorption and release. Yet the real data from space remained flawless 17 minutes per wave, with a precision finer than any machine built on Earth. It became clear to those who stayed awake long enough to witness it that the object was no longer just a traveller. It had become a participant in the solar system tuned to the heartbeat of its nearest star. To call it artificial would simplify something too vast for language. To call it natural would deny the intelligence of nature itself. So the observers chose silence, writing only what could be verified. The object maintains perfect thermal and magnetic stability. The pattern persists. That was all the record needed to say. But within those restrained words was a truth that reached deeper than science. The universe for a brief moment had achieved harmony with itself. In a cosmos ruled by entropy and motion, one small body had found stillness, and by doing so reminded its observers that balance is the purest form of survival. If you were to look closely at the data, you would see the rhythm too, the pulse of a core and a shell breathing together in fire, the whisper of a sun that has found something willing to listen. Tonight the harmony continues, spreading softly through magnetic tides and unseen fields. The pulse still hums across space, a memory of balance written in light. Some mysteries do not seek answers, they seek resonance. In the quiet days that followed the halo and the magnetic entrainment, something subtle began to reveal itself, not as a new event, but as the absence of an ending. The story of 3i Atlas was not closing. It was settling into a steady state, a long plateau of calm where every number seemed to breathe with unbroken rhythm. Across observatories from Chile to Kyoto, the same realization appeared in the data. The object was retreating from the sun, yet it refused to cool. Normally the thermal curve of any comet or asteroid drops sharply once the heat of perihelion fades. Dust radiates ice sublimates, and within hours the object grows dark and cold. But 3 Atlas was defying that cycle. The infrared sensors that traced its body recorded a perfect horizontal line. No decay, no reduction, no release. At first many assumed an error. Perhaps the sensors were saturated, or the atmosphere had interfered. Yet even in the vacuum of space the same signal persisted. The Solar Orbiter and Parker probe both confirmed the impossible. 3i Atlas was holding temperature. It was not losing energy. It was conserving it. The idea seemed absurd, an object maintaining internal heat in the cold expanse beyond the sun's radiance. Yet the more the numbers repeated, the more undeniable the pattern became. Every 17 minutes the same pulse recurred. Each wave carried with it a faint modulation in magnetic field strength, a ripple of symmetry that folded perfectly over the thermal readings. The data began to resemble something organic in its consistency, not because it was alive, but because it was intentional. A pulse of heat followed by a pulse of magnetic equilibrium, then a return to silence. In each cycle, energy seemed to move inward rather than outward, circulating instead of radiating. Kyoto's plasma laboratory performed a comparative model. The graphs showed the same frequency mirrored across multiple wavelengths. Infrared emissions and magnetic pressure peaks rose and fell together like a pair of lungs drawing breath in unison. The object, they concluded, was not cooling because it was not releasing energy randomly. It was regulating itself. To call it artificial would have been premature, yet to call it natural was to ignore what the senses whispered through numbers. No comet, no asteroid, no fragment of metal or dust has ever demonstrated self-regulating energy retention. Energy in the known universe disperses. That is its law. What 3i Atlas was doing, maintaining constant internal temperature, while reflecting less and less light, required balance so precise it bordered on choreography. The Atacama Array continued its vigil. Through long nights of data collection, the infrared team began to see subtle ripples on the shell's surface. Not cracks, not jets of vapour, but gentle undulations, dark to light soft waves moving from edge to centre and back again. Each ripple coincided with a thermal pulse. The object was not breaking apart, it was redistributing heat across its own skin like a living star stabilising itself after a flare. The effect became clearer as solar interference diminished. Every fluctuation in heat was matched by a counter-fluctuation in the surrounding magnetic field, like a conversation in perfect balance, one entity speaking in radiation, the other answering in magnetism. The waves grew fainter as they moved outward, but they never broke formation. Inside the Goddard Space Flight Center, the researchers began to use a quiet phrase among themselves, steady-state equilibrium. They meant it technically, but it carried something almost reverent, because nothing in the solar system is truly steady. Everything spins, decays, collides, burns, cools, and begins again. For a fragment from another star to find perfect stillness was more than strange, it was poetic. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory proposed a tentative model, a dual-body energy system where the dense core absorbed radiation, while the reflective shell moderated release, creating a sustained energy loop. Like a closed engine, but one that needed no fuel. Only sunlight, only proximity. In this interpretation, the object had become something like a resonator, turning the chaos of solar radiation into order. The magnetic field no longer fought with heat. It guided it, spreading it evenly across the structure. Every pulse was a minor correction, a rebalancing act. To those who stared long enough, it seemed like the simplest and most elegant answer. To survival, not resistance, but harmony. Atacama's readings showed that even the solar wind had softened around it. Where other objects left trails of ionized plasma, 3i Atlas moved in silence, forming a calm corridor in the chaos. The sun's own breath bent gently around it like air flowing over a wing. And so the deeper truth began to take shape. Perhaps this was not an anomaly to be solved, but a message to be understood. Not a defiance of physics, but a demonstration of it the way a snowflake under the right pressure arranges chaos into symmetry. In that symmetry there is peace. In that balance there is endurance. A scientist from Kyoto wrote a note late one night after 20 hours of data alignment. It is not surviving, it is participating, and with that the mystery changed shape once again. 3 Atlas was no longer the subject of observation. It had become part of the system that watched it. Its rhythm now resonated with the magnetic tides of the sun, subtly shifting solar behaviour in ways too gentle to quantify, but too consistent to ignore. Perhaps this was the universe's quiet truth, that energy when perfectly balanced becomes indistinguishable from silence. The light curve remained flat, the magnetic field steady, the temperature unchanged, and as the hours turned into days, a realization settled across every observatory still awake. They were no longer witnessing an object, they were witnessing a state of being. The scientists closed their notebooks with a kind of reverence. They had come searching for discovery, and instead found stillness proof that equilibrium itself might be the universe's oldest form of intelligence. Beyond the sun's edge, 3i Atlas continued its slow outward drift, carrying within it the rhythm of the star it had learned to understand, a single pulse of warmth held against the cold. No acceleration, no decay, only persistence. And for the first time, the observers began to realize that perhaps the object was not only remembering the sun, perhaps the sun too would remember it. There are no edges in the universe, only continuations. After perihelion, when most objects fall apart or fade into background noise, Three Atlas began to do something no model predicted. It continued with grace. Its orbit recalculated each day now traced a path not of escape but of return. Not back toward the sun, but outward, following a curve so gentle it seemed almost intentional, like a hand releasing itself from light. Across the world, telescopes caught the same quiet signature. A body no larger than a mountain drifting into the outer heliosphere, yet still glowing with the warmth it had gathered near the sun. The heat did not wane. The magnetic rhythm, that subtle 17-minute pulse, continued even as the distance grew, and around it the solar wind still moved with the same strange obedience, calm, structured whispering patterns that instruments could barely record. For the astronomers who had followed its journey since discovery, this was not data anymore. It was a kind of farewell. 3I Atlas was leaving, but not fading. It was carrying the rhythm of the sun outward, translating stellar energy into something quieter, a kind of steady hum that dissolved into interplanetary space. Kyoto's magnetometers, Atacama's infrared sensors and Parker's solar readings all showed the same lingering pattern, an object that should be cooling, but was not. It remained warm and stable, as though the energy it had absorbed had been turned inward, stored, not spent. This was not decay, it was endurance. At the European Space Agency's control room, the teams noticed something else. The object's new trajectory was slightly inclined from its predicted path, an imperceptible arc that carried it a fraction higher above the ecliptic plane. The deviation was small, only a few hundredths of a degree, but it persisted. That kind of movement suggested correction, not random drift, but intention, or perhaps self-stabilization. Whatever force had guided its behavior near the sun had not stopped. It was still active, still deliberate, still thinking, in the quiet way that physics thinks when it arranges itself perfectly. NASA's JPL ran simulations testing radiation pressure, solar drag, magnetic torque. Nothing explained the adjustment. A few researchers began to speak not in public reports, but in late-night messages of something subtler, a feedback between the object and the sun's magnetic field. A mutual resonance that did not end when proximity did. The sun itself seemed to pulse slightly differently now, its deep magnetic hum carrying a faint echo, as though something small had tuned the largest instrument in the system. One researcher, sleepless after 20 hours of comparing readings, wrote in the margins of his notebook, "It is as if the sun learned a word, spoke it once, and now cannot forget it." He never presented that sentence, but others read it later, and none of them crossed it out. As 3 Atlas drifted outward, the object's once blue reflection had flattened into a smooth neutral grey. Not dull, but serene a colour that seemed to contain every wavelength without favouring any. Spectroscopy confirmed the change. All spectral lines compressed, all emission subdued. It was in physical terms perfect equilibrium light that refused to argue with itself. For the team still watching this quiet transformation, felt like closure, but also continuation. No one could say whether the object was alive or conscious, or even reactive in the sense humans understood. But they all agreed on one thing: it behaved as though it understood how to remain. It was no longer a traveller tearing through the solar system on borrowed momentum. It was part of the system now moving in rhythm, carrying the memory of what it had touched. Atacama's final composite image showed the object as a dim sphere surrounded by a faint field of coherence, a boundary where the solar wind parted smoothly before merging again. The universe in that image did not look violent or chaotic. It looked at peace with itself. Over time, the pulse began to fade, not in amplitude, but in reach. Each wave travelled farther before disappearing, carried outward like a signal dissolving into background radiation. If you could follow it long enough, you would find it still not gone, but indistinguishable from the whisper of the cosmos itself. By then, the astronomers had stopped calling it an anomaly. They called it the equilibrium object, a name not of mystery but of acceptance. It would never return, not in human lifetimes. Its velocity was enough to carry it beyond the heliosphere, beyond the slow drag of the sun's gravity, into the interstellar dark where it had come from. Yet it did not vanish as comets do. Every few weeks, faint reflections would reappear at the edge of detection, tiny harmonics of light repeating the same pattern 17 minutes between peaks, each softer than the last. A signal that refused to stop breathing even as it receded into cold. No telescope could explain it. No equation could resolve it. But to those who had watched it since its approach, that pulse meant something more than science. It was continuity, a fragment of another system that had touched ours and left behind a rhythm we could not unhear. Even now, long after its departure, the sun's surface still carries faint magnetic ripples that match the same frequency. They fade into the noise of stellar convection, but they are there, a permanent conversation written into the star's own field like the memory of contact. It may never mean anything. It may never happen again. But somewhere a body of light and metal, or something beyond both, continues to orbit the dark between stars, humming quietly with energy it did not consume, only learn to hold. Perhaps that is what the cosmos teaches again and again, that survival is not power but balance, not resistance but alignment, that to endure is not to outshine the star but to learn its silence. And so the object moves onward, invisible now, still carrying the warmth of a sun that once tried to destroy it. A memory of equilibrium cast adrift between worlds. The astronomers close their journals. The data is archived. The room grows dim. Outside, the same sun that scorched it now rises quietly over Earth's soft light, spilling through morning clouds. Somewhere far beyond that light, 3i Atlas continues its long orbit home, not to a place but to the order from which all things begin. It's all right to not understand, because understanding is only one form of wonder. Tonight, as the universe turns, the rhythm still lingers in the background of creation, a single enduring pulse between stars. Out there beyond the reach of Radio 3i, Atlas has become something more like an idea than an object, a steady invisible rhythm nested inside the silence between stars. The last confirmed signal came months after Perihelion, faint but orderly, a thread of coherence woven through the solar static. Then nothing. No brightness, no reflection, only a measurable gap in noise like the echo of a presence that has learned how to hide. And yet the instruments still react to it. When arrays across the southern hemisphere turn toward the coordinates where the object should now be, their readings fall into unison. The background quiets, the interference drops, and the vacuum itself seems to settle. It is as if the act of searching for 3i Atlas summons the same stillness it once carried, a residual order that continues to shape the space around it. No one calls it a signal anymore. A signal implies intention, transmission, meaning. What remains here feels older and more indifferent than meaning. It is the physics of memory, the way energy leaves fingerprints on the medium it passes through. The universe, even when silent, remembers movement. At Kyoto, a researcher overlays the newest magnetic maps of the inner heliosphere with those from before the event. The difference is slight, almost imperceptible, but present a faint harmonic thread linking the sun's equatorial field lines, pulsing in the same frequency that defined 3i Atlas's rhythm. Not strong enough to alter stellar behavior, but persistent enough to endure the cycle of solar rotation. The sun hums differently now. What are the odds, one of them asks quietly, that this was the first time the question hangs unanswered, because the deeper truth is simple. If interstellar fragments can behave like this, then the sky's been whispering in this language long before we learned to listen. Perhaps there were other objects that crossed the sun's light and carried away its rhythm, leaving only tiny corrections in the background field, unreadable to us until now. The realization feels less like revelation, and more like recognition. The solar system, for all its scale, is not a closed loop of planets and dust. It breathes, it exchanges, it learns. At the European Southern Observatory, one analyst reprocesses old coronagraph data, hunting for patterns that match the rhythm of the Atlas event. A few faint traces appear buried deep in archives, decades-old subtle regularities mistaken for instrumental drift. When plotted on modern algorithms, they align. The possibility emerges that 3I Atlas was not a first encounter, but a reminder. A reoccurrence of something that happens in long intervals beyond our memory, beyond our sense of time. This idea changes the tone of the work. The astronomers once wary of speculation now speak softly of continuity rather than anomaly. They no longer ask what 3I Atlas was. They ask how often the universe does this, how many silent exchanges occur between stars, how many fragments have carried light in ways we cannot see. Because what if this wasn't an accident? What if balance itself, this steady rhythm of energy between matter and fire, is the hidden pattern beneath cosmic disorder? What if the Sun and 3I Atlas simply reminded us of something the universe has always known, that energy seeks equilibrium not by destruction but by conversation? Late one night, a young scientist writes in her notes, "Maybe every star is teaching. Maybe every fragment listens." The sentence is small private, but it captures what so many have begun to feel. When the telescopes finally turn elsewhere and the data streams slow, a strange melancholy fills the silence. They have no proof, no signal, no closure, only the enduring pulse of a question. The same one that rises every time science meets wonder. What if we have not been observing the universe, but being observed by its balance? No agency issues a formal conclusion. The reports end as they began, with numbers that hum softly against comprehension. Yet across observatories and institutions, the tone of the notes shifts. Where once the words anomaly object event appeared, now there is another term entirely: continuum. The continuum means the story is not over. It means the data is not dead. It means that silence itself can be a record. In a broader sense, it changes how those who watch the skies think about their work. The universe is no longer a place to be studied from afar, but a process in which we participate, instruments built not to capture truth, but to synchronize with it for a brief moment before it moves on. When they speak of 3I Atlas now, they do so with the tone reserved for things both known and unknowable. They speak of it as one speaks of a dream that refuses to fade, one that leaves behind no clear images, only the feeling that something vast has noticed you and then let you go. Some believe the object is still pulsing out there somewhere beyond Neptune, its rhythm spreading thinner with each orbit, blending into cosmic background noise. Others think it has gone dark completely, a cooled fragment of equilibrium waiting for the next star to pass near enough to wake it again. Either possibility feels right, because in truth both describe the same idea: continuity. For even if it sleeps, the pattern endures. Even if it is gone, its silence remains a kind of presence, a quiet law beneath the surface of light. And so the question remains not a question of what it was, but of what it means that it was at all. Maybe every orbit, every photon, every pulse of magnetism across space is part of a single vast experiment in balance. Maybe the universe itself is still learning how to keep its own rhythm. It's all right to not understand. Some questions are not there to be answered, only to remind us that we can still ask. Tonight the sky is calm. The sun is steady. And somewhere, far beyond its light, 3I Atlas drifts quietly through interstellar night, not gone, not forgotten, but folded back into the music from which it came. There are moments in the history of science when the universe seems to pause, not to reveal, but to remind. The story of 3 Atlas is one such moment. What began as a discovery soon became a meditation. What started as a trajectory through light became a lesson in silence. When it was first seen, the object behaved as all interstellar travellers should. It entered the solar system on a long slanted arc from deep space, carrying within it the cold of another sun. Astronomers prepared for brightness, for dust, for the chaos of heat and sublimation as it neared our star. But instead of eruption, they witnessed calm as it approached Perihelion, that intimate, dangerous point of orbit where even the strongest bodies unravel. 3I Atlas refused to behave. Its light dimmed instead of brightened. Its surface cooled instead of flaring. And the dust plume everyone expected never came. For 6 hours it vanished entirely from every tracking array, silent against the sun's corona, before reappearing slightly off course as if it had changed its mind about motion itself. That was the first disobedience. The second came in the data. Where there should have been gas, there was none. Where there should have been fragments, there was only cohesion. The object's surface reflected light in ways no natural material should. Polarization patterns hinted at texture, not chaotic dust, but structure layered and responsive, perhaps even adaptive. And then came the light curve, smooth, exact, unbroken. No flicker, no turbulence, no variance. The kind of precision that even engineered satellites struggle to maintain. Some called it coincidence, others calibration. But to those who sat beneath the endless hum of observatory equipment, it felt like poise. When the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory released its images, scientists across the world saw what was not there. A clean path through plasma, a trail that glowed without scattering. The sun's heat, measured in millions of degrees, should have stripped 3SOS Atlas to vapour. Instead, it passed unscathed like a thought moving through fire. Infrared readings told the same impossible story: no thermal plume, no tail, no coma. A comet that should have burned instead absorbed, dimmed and cooled. A fragment that should have perished became quieter, steadier, almost contemplative. At first, astronomers proposed practical explanations: composition, orientation, measurement error. But one by one the theories fell apart. Even iron and nickel composites would have shed gas. Even an angled rotation could not have hidden outgassing from instruments stationed across the globe. So another hypothesis formed, whispered, reluctant, beautiful. Perhaps the object was not resisting the sun. Perhaps it was responding to it. Light curve analysis suggested something extraordinary, that the surface of 3R Atlas adjusted its reflectivity as it moved through radiation, dimming itself to survive. The polarization of photons showed rhythmic shifts, behavior associated not with chaos but with coherence. It was as if the object had learned how to listen to the star's language and answer in kind. When the radio arrays went silent, 6 hours of total disappearance, something even stranger occurred. Each radar pulse sent toward the object vanished, completely absorbed without return. But in ultraviolet bands, faint flashes appeared, perfectly synchronized with those lost signals. Not reflection, but response. The object was not just gone, it was interacting. It was in some unknown way aware. That silence was followed by an apparition, a perfect halo forming around its last known position, a magnetic ring expanding evenly through the solar wind. No heat and no dust, just symmetry, perfect and mathematical. It was not a flare, not debris, it was a field. The first evidence that something there could shape magnetism as naturally as matter shapes shadow. For hours the halo grew, glowing not in brightness, but in polarization, bending light as if space itself had been rewritten. The event defied plasma physics. Near the sun fields writhe and tangle, this one held its geometry concentric and calm until it faded back into nothingness. When it was gone, the sun cooled. 4%. A number so small in human terms, so vast in cosmic scale, that it left even the most rational scientists silent. The corona dimmed around the coordinates of its passage as if energy itself had been drawn inward and kept. The phrase thermal paradox entered the lexicon of astrophysics. No one could explain how an object could absorb and contain stellar heat without disintegrating. No model could account for a magnetic halo that lingered after its source had vanished. And yet as new data poured in, one truth became undeniable. The region of the sun it had touched remained altered, magnetically restructured, calmer than before. Weeks passed. Then the pulse returned, a 17-minute rhythm echoing faintly across multiple wavelengths. Heat, field, silence, repeat. The signal persisted even as the object moved away from the sun. It was as though 3I Atlas had not only survived its encounter, but carried a piece of the sun's energy with it, harmonizing rather than resisting. The scientists called it magnetic entrainment, a resonance between a star and its visitor. But others quietly called it something else, harmony, because what the graphs revealed was not randomness, it was cooperation. A dialogue between two forces, one infinite and radiant, the other small and deliberate, finding a shared rhythm between destruction and balance. For days, then weeks, the pattern remained perfect. Every pulse timed, every heat spike met by magnetic stillness. The object's thermal output did not decay, it plateaued, it maintained. The core pulsed faintly, the shell shimmered in regulation. Entropy, that final law of loss, had been delayed. Atacama's infrared sensors revealed ripples sliding across the shell's surface, synchronized with each pulse. Not eruptions, but gentle waves of light and shadow redistributing heat like breath. The surface seemed alive, not in consciousness, but in control. The scientists began to understand this was not an object burning fuel. It was an object maintaining order. It had entered the sun's domain not to resist it, but to learn how to live within it. Even after it departed, the echo of that understanding remained. The sun's magnetosphere now carries faint harmonics at the same frequency, 17 minutes, repeating indefinitely. They are too subtle for human ears, but the numbers know. The rhythm continues. And so 3i Atlas moves outward slower, now dimmer farther but still in motion. Its surface no longer glows blue or white but grey, the colour of equilibrium, the union of all light and all silence. It carries within it the heat of a star and the calm of its own discipline. To some it is gone. To others it's simply continuing, moving toward the region where all forces flatten into the same hum, the great stillness between stars. Every so often at the edge of detection a faint oscillation appears, a soft pulse, matching that ancient rhythm, too regular to be chance, too humble to be proof. When it fades, the space it leaves behind seems quieter, as though the universe itself is taking one long breath of gratitude. Perhaps that is all. 3i Atlas ever was a reminder that balance is the purest form of survival. That light need not explode to be radiant. That motion need not destroy to be meaningful. The scientists have archived their reports now. The observatories have turned to new targets. But in the long hours between transmissions, when the domes are dark and the instruments whisper they still think of it, that small visitor from another sun, that traveller who refused to burn, they think of the way it turned heat into silence, chaos into order, and disappearance into persistence. They think of the moment when light met patience, and both remained unchanged. And somewhere beyond, where light begins to thin, 3i's Atlas drifts on a grey ember, carrying the sun's warmth into interstellar night, harmonizing still with the memory of fire. It's all right to not understand. Because some truths are not meant to be solved, only shared like music. And tonight the universe hums softly to itself, steady and patient, repeating the rhythm of that silent traveller. Sleep now, observer. The stars are quiet again, and in their quiet, they remember. When the instruments grow silent and the last reflections fade, we are left with something quieter than discovery, a sense of belonging to the same vast rhythm that 3i Atlas once followed. It came from another star, crossed the warmth of our sun, and moved on carrying its questions with the same patience the cosmos has always shown us. For a brief moment, traveller, we stood within its light. We watched a fragment of another dawn glide past our sky, calm and self-contained, teaching us not with words, but with endurance. It reminded us that creation is never finished, that every grain of dust, every orbit, every beam of starlight is still becoming. The mystery hasn't ended. It only continues where our eyes can't follow, beyond the range of radio, beyond the reach of knowing. And that's all right, because the silence between stars is not emptiness. It's memory. It's promise. Tonight, as you drift beneath the same sky that once held 3i Atlas, remember this: we are part of what we observe. The act of looking upward is already participation in the universe's story. So let the night close gently around you. Let the unknown remain beautiful. And if this story found you in the dark, stay for the next. Rest well, observer. The universe will keep watch. Stay curious.